Thanks very much. So my background is in ecology from the University of Queensland, so I'm from Australia, but now I'm doing my PhD in the University of Cambridge, just in case you're confused about the accent. So my PhD is looking at the barriers and solutions towards implementing evidence-based practice. And to do that, I have had to learn quite a lot of different methods from the social science perspective to answer these kind of questions. So please bear with me, and I hope by the end of the talk that you'll see the need for a very interdisciplinary approach to solving conservation problems. So in the previous session, we've definitely discussed about the need for evidence. So conservation practitioners are having to work with continually reduced budgets, but also having to produce good conservation outcomes. So there's the need for producing conservation management actions that are effective and efficient. Academics are required often by their funders to show that there's an applied impact of their research. And then policymakers are wanting credible advice for them to be able to make transparent decisions some of the time. But as we've talked about in the last discussion, often no research exists. So when you type in to Web of Science or Google, there might not be any information there. If there is information, you might come across this paywall where that you're getting asked to pay a ridiculous amount of money for each PDF. And then if you do get access, the information might be really hard to understand. So that's from a practitioner's point of view. From the researcher's point of view, they might get frustrated if practitioners and policymakers are ignoring the research. And this cartoon here is of IPCC scientist in 1990 up here saying, yeah, so this climate change thing, it could be a problem. In 1995, climate change, definitely a problem. In 2001, yep, we should be doing something and getting along with this pretty soon. By 2013, we really have checked, and we're not making this up. And then, is this thing on? So that's kind of sometimes the feeling that researchers might face towards this. And then, so for policymakers, they might have their credible advice to make their transparent decisions, but then they have to layer on top of that public opinion and then politics to make their decisions. So when all of these three types of people, these three different sectors, try to use evidence, often they are faced with a science-practice divide. And just some examples of evidence to show this. So these studies are showing how conservation managers, so for this example in Australia and over there is from South Africa, showing that, I'm just going to get this. Yeah, so showing that practitioners are more likely to use experience-based information to inform their decisions, so that's anecdotes and managers' observations, as opposed to evidence-based information, which is here and here, and that includes journal articles, reports, and other types of data. So we definitely know that this gap exists, and it's often described as this huge gap between the scientists are sitting over there and the practitioners are sitting over here. And I'm really glad that it's not as big as this, because you're all here in this room together. So here's an example where it doesn't always have to be this huge divide. And there's a lot of papers talking about this issue. But we still, while they are talking about, okay, there's all these problems and there's some of these solutions, we still don't know why it's happening, so what are the most important barriers, and we don't have a complete list of all the barriers towards using science in practice. Because all of these examples, they selectively pull different barriers out without actually doing something systematically in a rigorous and thorough way. And then we don't know how to solve this problem. So there's, again, lots of solutions suggested by people, but no one has tested the effectiveness of these solutions at improving the use of science in practice. Well, there are a few examples, but mostly there are very few. And then again, there's no inventory or a list of all the solutions that can be used to improve the use of science in practice for conservation. And so how can we start bridging this divide? So evidence-based conservation has been talked about quite a bit today. It's a framework that tries to improve the use of science in practice, but it goes through a specific process rather than using a paper to say, okay, we need to make this decision. It's a specific process that has to happen for it to be classed as evidence-based conservation. And it's been based, or we've adapted it from the medical literature, and evidence-based conservation's kind of began in 2000. And even now, in 2014, we still haven't really got a good definition. So this year, as part of my PhD, I was working with academics and practitioners to develop this definition. And so this is what we've come up with based on an adaptation from the medical literature. So it's the integration of best available information. And by that we mean using the evidence-based practice steps. I don't have time to go into them today because I could speak about them for an hour. But it's about asking the correct questions, which we've spoken about, collating the evidence systematically, appraising that evidence, and then putting that together into the evidence. And then the idea is to integrate that evidence with the practitioner's preferences and expertise, and that's based on their experience and education. And then you have to combine all of that information and make it relevant to your local context, so that the outcome is a decision that's supported by the evidence and informed by these other types of information as well. During talking to people about what evidence-based conservation is, there's several misconceptions and debates about why we should be using it, or it's not the best framework that we should be using. But I think a lot of that comes down to just misunderstanding or not being aware. So I won't go into too much detail, but some of the things that people talk about are it ignores practitioners' expertise and local context, but I just showed you that was part of the process of making the management decision. It's too prescriptive. There's an assumption that the scientific evidence is better than other types of information. And we're developing methods of how we can be putting both scientific information and, say, local knowledge and together. So it's the same as adaptive management. So it fits in with the adaptive management cycle, and it's the step before you start making your decision and start doing management. So rather than just trying things, you have to go and do the systematic searching to make sure that anyone else has done the same thing before. It's just a buzzword, nothing new, we already do that. So again, there's lots of people saying that they're doing it, but in my research I found that there's very few people that are doing that specific process to make sure that the research is systematic. And that for medicine it's easy because you're just dealing with one person, whereas for conservation it's far too complicated, dealing with far too many different situations, so it's too hard. But at least kind of making your management decisions in this type of framework, it breaks it down into breaks the big problem down into smaller questions that are answerable, are able to be answered. So it allows for that. So the talk, what I'll be talking about more today, is about the barriers and solutions towards using evidence-based practice and shifting towards the framework of this evidence-based conservation. So I wanted to identify the barriers for conservation organisations as a whole, and then practitioners individually to using scientific information, and then also identify the effective solutions to overcoming these barriers. And there I focused on two different areas. So the reason I wanted to do both was because in UK and East Anglia, that's where evidence-based conservation kind of began, and everyone talks about it. Everyone says, oh yes, we do evidence-based conservation. So I wanted to see, well, actually, do they? And then KwaZulu-Natal, because it's renowned for having really good conservation programs and projects. But when I speak to practitioners here, they are not as aware or very few people are aware of what evidence-based conservation is. So I thought it was a good comparison. And of course, there's very different environmental and conservation problems, and also the socioeconomic context as well. So I wanted to get a broad perspective of what the barriers and solutions are. Now, people ask me what my ecosystem is that I work on, or what's my field, and this is my this is my ecosystem. So it's all the different people within conservation. 5 minutes, okay. So we're focusing on the organisations, the practice organisations, the individuals, and then the universities and the individual researchers. And then for my study, I was looking at several different types of organisations, so government organisations, NGOs, and also local governments. So the methods, I did a literature review of both the medical literature and the conservation literature, because the medical literature has done millions of systematic reviews on what are the barriers and solutions to evidence-based conservation, or evidence-based medicine. I did semi-structured interviews, and I did a qualitative analysis to pull out the barriers and solutions for this. And there's several limitations to using interviews. I can go through them later if you're interested. So just a quick description of an organisation. So usually you have a section, like an operations section, and an advisor section doing science in big organisations. So I was interested in looking at the strategic levels versus the on-ground levels, and then within and across the different departments. So some general observations about research use, and some lovely observations of animals as well at the same time. So people are using research, but it's not in a systematic way. So people say, oh yeah, I get papers sent to me by my colleagues, and it was really interesting. But that is not, it's kind of ad hoc, and you have no idea of how much information you're missing if you're doing it that way. Obviously it differs across organisational type and individuals. And there was a difference in between the type of research. So in research that was conducted within the organisation, so for example, master's students, and then external research, so stuff happening in national and international areas. And I haven't gone into too much detail about this because I'm still conducting a survey on this, and I don't want to be influencing my results, or influencing your results based on what I say here. So some enablers of using research, and this is the number of practitioners in KZN. I will only be presenting KZN stuff. This is a number of practitioners in KZN who mention these barriers and enablers in their interviews. So the first one is having an awareness of needing to improve their management. It's not really related to using science in practice, but always having the willingness to improve and being open to new suggestions. That was quite important. And then the next two are that the organisation recognises the need for evidence in that it can be improving its management actions, and also for the reputation of the organisation. And then personal relationships were extremely important as well. So relationships between practitioners and academics, and advisors and managers. And I'll go through, okay, so now just quickly, I wanted to get you to write down the barriers that you think are most important, because we'll be using this in the workshop, before I tell you what I found in my research. So you've got 3 sticky notes on your page, on your chair. So if you can think of the barriers that you have noticed that towards using science in practice, either from wherever you're sitting, if you're an academic or if you're a practitioner. And just, one barrier per piece of paper, if that's all right. Thanks. And it can be, just... I've got 1 minute left. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, if that's all right. Maybe, should we turn the lights off again? Or I can just keep talking. So for the, there were 6 different categories that the barriers fell into, and this is based on the literature. There were over 100 barriers that I found towards using science in practice. I'll go through them really quickly. So in the evidence, so nature for evidence, applicability, accessibility, and quality of the evidence. The decision context, it was influenced by politics, experience, and the timing of the decision. Organisations, so the barriers towards using science in practice was highly influenced by organisational culture, structure, and resources. At the researcher side, as we've talked about before, there's no incentives to be disseminating information, and the publish or perish idea. The links between researchers and practitioners, so there's attention, mistrust, communication barriers, and then lack of opportunities for networks. And then the practitioner side, that was heavily influenced by attitudes, awareness, characteristics of the individual, so experience and education, and their skills of being able to read scientific information. And so the top barriers that I found from KZN into practitioners were the competing factors for the decision, so political information, and like feasibility, and then applicability and relevance of the research, which we spoke about before, and capacity of the management agency to be improving that change. And if you notice these ones here, can you read that? Do you want to turn the lights off again? Thanks. So the purple ones are the things that organisations have to change, or barriers towards the organisation, whereas these ones, so time taken to read papers and the applicability and relevance of the research, kind of everyone can be changing and working towards that. And solutions, so it was really hard for practitioners to think about the solutions of how to improve that, but some of the main ones that we talked about were like collaborating with universities and other institutes, so that was the main one, and having embedded scientists in the organisation as pracademics, as Jessica Coburn mentioned yesterday, so meaning practitioners who, or like people who are sitting in between the two, so knowledge brokers in terms of their job is to translate the knowledge and the science to the practitioners. But again, this is not a complete list. There are over 100 solutions that we can be doing. Yep, I'm stopping soon. So if we can be implementing all of these solutions, ideally it will become a much more complicated network. And every solution or every context is so complex. So even if you implement one solution, you're not going to have. It might not actually improve the use of evidence because there's lots of other factors playing involved. And also every context is really specific. So you need to be developing tailored plans for your individual or your organisation to be looking at how we can be moving forward. So what? Why do we need this list of barriers and solutions? So it allows organisations to go through this list of barriers and say, okay, which ones are important for our organisation and what solutions can we be doing to improve this? I haven't listed all the barriers and solutions because there's a really long list, but that will be the output of this research. And the next steps is to find out, okay, so which solutions are easy to implement, which solutions have not been tried before, and how can we be identifying the effectiveness of each of these? Because as I said, there's very few tests of the effectiveness of each of these interventions. So that allows people to start, if they're starting to implement these solutions, to be monitoring and evaluating them as well. And just if you are a practitioner in working in KZN, working in an NGO, government or a local government agency, I'm still doing an online survey. So if you haven't yet received an email from me, please come and see me because I'm looking at trying to find out if practitioners have access to the information that they find most useful and relevant. So please come and see me or send me an email. It's an online survey, or I've got lots of paper copies here, so you can just fill them in. It takes 15 minutes, and that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Just to say thank you for my supervisors and collaborators. And it's a project in progress, so I really welcome your ideas and thoughts. And this is what the next session is going to be about, to get your ideas about how we can improve this use of science in practice. Thanks.